Welcome to Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere. If you've not met me before, my name is Shelley Fishel. I'm known as the MS Office Maestro, and I've been training assistants, business owners, organizations for over 25 years on Microsoft Office applications, and I still do that. However, I have a passion for assistants. I think you're all amazing. Businesses wouldn't work without you. And so I've created this podcast for assistants everywhere. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting each week with a different guest expert. We'll find out how they got to where they are, what they're up to now, and how they can help you. Tips and tricks abundant. We will learn loads. So that's me, Shelley Fishel. Enough of this introduction. In a moment, I'll be bringing on my guest. Welcome to Virtually Amazing Assistants podcast with me, Shelley Fishel, as your host. You may remember Virtually Amazing, the podcast for virtual assistants. It ran for a mega 72 episodes through COVID up until January of 2022. And I presented it together with my co-host, Joe Brianti, who is my first opening guest of Virtually Amazing Assistants. Joe, I'm thrilled to have you back as my guest this time rather than as a co-host.
And I am thrilled to be your first guest. I am so excited that you've come back with the podcast in a new way, fresh and everything. So looking forward to subscribing.
Great. So on that note, as Joe's mentioned it, do hit subscribe. Subscribe to us on YouTube or on your favorite podcast player. We are on all the podcast apps, Spotify and Apple included, and the Blueberry directory. But I think we should kick off with me just telling you what the format of this new podcast is. So it's going to be me interviewing a guest each week. I have a long list of amazing guest experts in the assistant industry. So some are going to be VA trainers or people with specialities that will be useful to virtual assistants. Others are PA and EA trainers or who have specialities of interest to people who are employed as assistants at whatever level. And I think that all assistants are absolutely amazing because no business could run without their assistants. My husband's an accountant, and when he had his practice, he had an amazing, what he used to call her a secretary. That's kind of how it was then. But she was amazing. And he really said many times that he couldn't have run his practice without her. And I know that's the case for so many small businesses, large businesses, and corporations. So that is my aim. And I want to help you, my community of assistants, stand out, learn stuff, and just be amazing. And of course, I also want to introduce you to the things that I do that can help you along the way. That's the quid pro quo. So Joe, let's have a start off. Before, when we used to do the podcast before, we used to have an opening segment where we had a bit of chit chat about what's going on in our lives. Then we moved into the guest expert, and then we did kind of a summary. So let's have a bit of a chit chat about what's been going on in our lives since we last did a podcast together.
Gosh,
so, yes. What's up with you? Where have you? Because you've got an amazing story since.
So I talked a lot about having two little boys. Well, those two little boys now stand head and shoulders above me. We've done GCSEs and they did really very well. And they're now in sixth form studying A-levels and they're independent. They're doing stuff. We're making plans about university apprenticeships, and that's where our conversations are. And they are far more engaged in the world, and it's really wonderful to see them developing independent thought and views and opinions, and both having the ability to debate those opinions. So that our life has moved on in that way. Professionally, I'm now a data protection officer. I was very passionate about GDPR as a VA, and I've done quite a bit of work around that. And I became accredited as a data protection officer. And that's all I talk about now is GDPR, global data protection, cybersecurity, and the benefits to organizations from operating in a compliant way. And I do an awful lot of training around this area, both for VAs to help them run their small businesses, but also I've been doing a lot of corporate work as well. And, going into teams and talking about data management, talking about GDPR and how assistants can support their teams with managing GDPR and helping the organization remain compliant. So it's been a big change professionally too.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So now, so let's focus a little bit on that. When you talked about going into to help a team
Yeah.
be more compliant, because I did some work many years ago when I still had a face-to-face training company. I had a client in Bath, which was fantastic to go there. It's such a lovely place.
Yes, it
If
is.
my international listeners, it's in the south of England, and it's just the most beautiful city. It has Roman baths, and it's
Yeah, it's
just a
beautiful.
lovely place
Yeah.
to go. So they looked after, they were originally an almshouse, and they've kind of gradually got into carer in the community. And they have social workers and nurses and people that go into people's homes. And they asked me, and this is before GDPR was a thing, they were already concerned about personal information, especially as most of the people in there go in a special category. They weren't people like you and me, they were people with some sort of special
Needs.
need
Mm.
of some, it might have been physical and it might be monetary, but either way they wouldn't want their data to just be bandied about. And even then I had to go and search and search and search because it wasn't a thing. And they talked about who was who was the data controller and who was the data owner and all of that kind of stuff. So when you go into an organization, where do you start? What do you do first? If, let's say, big
So
organization.
if it's a bigger organization, they've probably got a compliance department. So I ask for copies of privacy policies or, any of those documents that bigger businesses might already have. I have a look at those and then I design the training around them. So we talk a little bit about awareness. What is GDPR? What does it mean to you as an assistant? And then what does your company say you are required to do? And how can we implement that across your team of assistants? And how can you support your CEO or your director or your team of directors that you're looking after to ensure that they are managing their workload and their data within the bounds of that compliance scenario?
That's brilliant. And so I presume then when you go into a smaller business, or maybe you have VAs who are working with many businesses, where do you start there? What do you do there?
So with the VAs, it's about talking to them about some of those very basic things. They don't have a full compliance department behind them. So it's talking to them about the basics. What actually is GDPR? What are their obligations? How do they protect data? And if you're in a startup position, you might not have the money to invest a lot. So what are the fundamentals? What is the non-negotiables, I suppose, to understand? And if you start with the basics, like I've got a paid for antivirus, I've got secure passwords, I'm using a password manager, those kinds of basics, that's where I start if you're a business owner. And as your business grows, your complexity grows, so your need to understand more and develop more grows, and those sorts of things.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. So what kind of businesses do you like working with the most?
Oh gosh, you see, for me GDPR is such that I can talk to anybody about it, and I can get excited about a startup VA, an established VA, or I can easily get excited about going into a bigger business and spending a whole day on site with them, talking to various members of staff, the management, the assistants, about what is it that happens in their business, and coming up with a plan of action to support them to move towards compliance or to improve their compliance. Sometimes that can be a complete overhaul of things. Sometimes it's a tweak.
Yeah, that's
You know,
brilliant.
and it's about, for me, building that culture, that understanding of a privacy first environment where, we understand the general aspects of the law and how we as a business comply, because every business is different.
Yeah.
No two trainers do things the same way. No two care businesses do. No two VAs do things the same way. So it's about understanding how you do business and how you need to apply it in your business.
Okay. So, Joe, let's just backtrack a little bit on your story, because I mean, I've known you for a long time now.
Yeah.
So I know that before you were a VA, you were a project manager.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about managing large projects? And
Yeah.
that was that as an employee, or was that freelance? Was it a project
So
based?
a bit of both. I've done both freelance subcontract work, and I've been an employee, and I've worked as part of teams where I supported work streams. I managed small projects that were part of bigger programs of work, all sort of business transformation, mainly in the technical environment, because if you're doing a business transformation project, there'll be the pure business projects, let's say the procurement, the sales, the marketing, and then there's the tech work streams that support those business functions. And sitting across both areas, you can understand the tech, but you also then understand what is it the finance team need, what is it that procurement need, what is it that marketing do, and currently I work with a lot of marketers, so I understand their need for data and their need for analytics. But how are we doing that in a compliant way, with the right permissions or with the right notices in place to enable that to happen?
Yeah. So with the current fan base or non-fan base for all things AI, I
Yes.
we can have a nice little chat about AI and compliance. So I, for example, have a Copilot license for my
Yeah.
Microsoft 365, and I have to say, I love it.
Yeah.
It saves me oodles of time. It's quite
Yeah.
creative. I can
Yeah.
ask it to give me suggestions of titles for courses, for example. And that's fantastic,
Yeah.
because that's not my skill set.
No.
However, I do know that when I need to write a marketing email that's going to speak to people, I do employ a marketing person to do that, a copywriter to do that
Yeah.
properly, who I've worked with for a long time.
Yeah.
But I love the AI, and I know that I follow a guy called Daniel Anderson. I'm hoping one day he'll come on the podcast, and he's all about SharePoint teams and Copilot. And his passion at the moment is Copilot. And his thing about Copilot is it has to be set up correctly in the back end,
Yes, it
with
does.
the right permissions, and then it's quite secure. But
Yes.
I've had assistants saying to me, we're not going to get Copilot because IT don't think it's secure enough. So what's your take on all the AI stuff? Because to me, it seems like if you're going out to ChatGPT or Gemini or one of the other ones out there, it's not inside your business. So you may potentially be exposing business data.
So
Where do we go with that, Joe, from a compliance perspective?
So before I say anything, what I want to say is that I always come across as a Debbie Downer when I talk about this, and I'm really not. So I want to make it really clear. I use a lot of AI. Some of the things that I use AI for, I take a transcript of a video, I get AI to transcribe the video. I then take that transcript and I put it through a tool, and it drafts blogs, it drafts social media posts, that sort of thing. Now, the caveat is I would never put that blog or that social media post out as it is, because it doesn't necessarily totally reflect my voice. But I do use it to draft. A bit like you, the blank page is like, don't know what to do, what do I want to write? So I ask it for things like suggestions for blog titles, for suggestions for this, that, and the other. So I'm very pro AI, right? But here's the thing. If you are using ChatGPT, the free model, or any of the other AI models, and you are not sort of tightening them down, putting them controlled within your organization, you could be putting data, and we're not just talking here about personal data. That is an issue, but there's also the confidential business data, your sales, your marketing, all of those things that are business sensitive rather than personal data. They then go into potentially a language model to train that model that then could be spat out for somebody else's results. So you do need to think really very carefully. Now, earlier this year, I did some training with a very large global data company over in Dublin. And we were talking about their Copilot implementation. And they had created a sandbox, and they had put Copilot into this sandbox with, part of their Microsoft tenant. It was all boxed off. And one of the things that they realized was that they'd asked it to create this report. And this report was being created by Veronica, the receptionist. And because their settings had not been done right, Veronica was getting content in this report that should really only have been seen by the finance director or HR or whatever it was. So we talked about that, and I said, well, what you need to do is, when you implement Copilot, you have to make sure that the security settings in Copilot match your global organization. So Veronica, your receptionist, will only be able to extract information that is visible to her permission level.
Yeah.
And then the next level up in the organization will see this if they produce the same report. So we talked about Copilot, and I think it's brilliant for smaller businesses who are, don't have the benefit perhaps of a big IT team. Think very carefully about who you're doing it. Make sure you're using paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't be putting it out on freebies. Make sure that you've looked at the terms and conditions. So, for example, if you're using it to create images or music clips or something along those lines, check what the copyright rules are, because it's slightly broader. And then the other thing to think about is, having a statement. It needs to be in your privacy policy now, and you need to have some sort of AI statement that you can reflect how you're using AI and what you're using it for, because as a small business owner, you want to be open, you want to be transparent. GDPR requires you to be open and transparent. So do a lot of other global pieces of legislation in the privacy arena. So you do need to think about, how am I transparent about my use? Those kinds of things. And the final thing I want to say is that there is legislation coming around this. In Europe, we already have some legislation, not necessarily relevant to all businesses, but there is some. There is some coming in the UK, and there is some coming in the US. So it's watch this space. Keep in touch with me. I will be putting out content as soon as I know about these exciting updates in the AI world.
Yes. That's phenomenal. Thank you, Jo. That was really, really interesting. It's made me think about some things. In fact, I was on a webinar myself last week, learning about exactly that, tying Copilot down within your organization. And if you are in the IT, if you are an assistant and you're in the IT part of your organization, then you'll have heard about Microsoft Purview, you'll have heard about Azure, and all of those places, and all of those document sets, permission sets, roles within the organization need to have been set up. So when you work in a corporate and you turn up on your first day, they give you a laptop and your login details, and you've already got permission to go where you're allowed to go with your role. So all they need to do now is connect Copilot into those permissions directly. And when you go into Copilot, it's really cool because you can get it to search only in your work environment, or you can tell it to go to the web. So if I'm asking it for a title for a new course, I might go to the web. But if I'm trying to summarize some internal documents, then I'll keep it local within my company. And then that information doesn't go outside of your organization. As you say, doesn't go into that large language model to train
Yeah.
everybody else.
Yes. Yeah. And it, it is, AI is phenomenal, and it gives all business owners, from the small startup VA through to big corporates, a lot of opportunity. And I know that I've had conversations with people who feel worried that, it's going to take my job as an assistant. It really isn't. Your mastery of AI is going to make you more valuable to your CEO, because it's going to enable you to be more effective or more efficient in some areas where it might take you a long time, let's say, to crunch some numbers. You might be able to do that much, much quicker. You might be able to come up with different ideas by doing that search across your organization, across the web. One of the tools that I use quite a lot, and I use it more for search than I do Google these days, is called Perplexity. And the reason I use Perplexity is because if I ask it a question, let's say, what's the latest piece of legislation on AI, for example, it will bring back some results and some content, but it will also give me links to the reference articles or places on the web. So it's like bookmarking where it's summarizing its information from. So it's like having your sort of table of references in a document. It puts all of these as little links and documents. So rather than it just spewing some content, you can validate it, because this is the other really important thing with AI, is to validate it, because there are risks associated with AI, things like deep fakes, things like hallucinations, which is random stuff. And also, it can be used harmfully. So by using something like Perplexity that gives you those reference points, you can validate the content that you are reading, and you can then determine or make some determination as to the accuracy.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that when using Copilot, if you ask it to draft anything or report on anything within your organization, it lists all of the PowerPoint presentations, Word documents that it's pulled information from. And if it's gone out to the web, it will give you all those links to the relevant articles. So a bit like Perplexity. So I added a banner on the screen before if you're watching, so you can go and look for that, because I think that's a great recommendation, Joe.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've been chatting for ages. This is the first episode. I'm learning as I go along doing this by myself. And I forgot to set a timer. And my new recording studio doesn't tell me how long we've been on. I haven't got a countdown. So I think we've been talking quite a while, probably about half an hour, I would guess. And I'm sure we could carry on chatting forever. And I just wanted to thank Joe very much for coming back and being my first guest on Virtually Amazing Assistants. And thank you to all our listeners, older listeners who used to listen to Virtually Amazing, and new listeners that hopefully we're picking up for Virtually Amazing Assistants. Please do tell your friends about it. Share it everywhere. You'll see me posting on social media, so please give it a like and a share, subscribe, and engage with the podcast. I'd love to hear your comments when you listen to a podcast. Leave a comment, like it, tell us what's working, what's not. I have a huge list of guests coming up. I'm going to be, Joe and I are recording this on the 8th of November. The launch of this first episode is going to be the 17th of December. And between now and then, I'm recording 8 or 9 further episodes. So I've got quite a few under my belt, and it's just going to be awesome and amazing. I should use amazing more. You're Virtually Amazing Assistants. So thank you, Joe, for coming on the podcast. And I think I could personally think of nothing worse than being mired in GDPR all day. But that's what floats your boat. And that is what's brilliant about all of us being so different.
Yes,
and what doesn't work for one person works really well for somebody else. So once again, thank you, Joe, for coming on the podcast. To be continued. What can I say? Join me next week when I will be chatting to, if I find my spreadsheet, I can tell you that next week I am going to be chatting with the brilliant Amanda Johnson from VACT. She is an amazing lady. And I have a list of guests coming up who span both the VA world and the PAEA world. So we've started off Joe's GDPR, which is both. Amanda is the VA world, but if you're a PA thinking of becoming a VA, Amanda is one of the people you should be following. And then I have some EA people and PA people coming along and more VA people. It's going to be fun. And as you can tell, I like talking. So I think I better stop now. And I'll see you next week on Virtually Amazing Assistants. Thanks for listening. I'm going to see you next week with my next guest on the Virtually Amazing Assistants podcast. And that's me, Shelley Fishel, the MS Office Maestro, signing off for this week.